Welcome to Insights. I'm Dick Goldberg, and our subject, moving from toxic fighting, bad fighting, unproductive fighting in couples, to healthy and productive ways to resolve differences and conflicts. I hate to tell you this, but conflict in marriage, serious differences, they're inevitable in every relationship. How they're resolved has a great deal to do with the success of a marriage or partnership. With us today, Dr. Donald Ferguson. He's the author of a book with an interesting title, Reptiles in Love. I think he's talking about humans. Dr. Ferguson, clinical psychologist, is the founder and director of Infinite Relationship Counseling Center. He's been working with couples for 30 years. He's also teaching couples therapy to future clinicians at Edgewood College. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks for the invite.
Why the title, Reptiles in Love?
The Reptiles in Love comes from the primitive part of the brain, which we talk about as the reptilian brain. It's the smallest part of the brain that controls the fight or flight response, the way of responding to danger. And the reason for this book is that we find that when couples feel hurt, betrayed, injured, ignored, whatever, by the person closest to them, they go into that fight or flight response almost as if it was a physical battle.
How often does that happen? If you have a conflict in a marriage and you haven't seen Don Ferguson, how likely is that to happen in the course of a relationship?
I think it's very likely to happen, and as certain themes arouse people, it happens faster and faster. In other words,
Really?
People tip each other off so often that they have money problems, so as soon as one of them starts to mention something that sounds like it might be about money, the heart rate speeds up, and they begin to go into a defensive maneuver. If it's gone poorly a number of times, they begin to train each other to respond in this defensive pattern. And so in a way they go very primitive very quickly. And then they will start seeing some signs of the reptilian brain activity. They'll start repeating themselves. They'll raise their voices. They may smirk or give a signal that they're contemptuous. In a variety of ways, they'll go into a very primitive mode that they would probably never treat a colleague at work that way or a person on the street.
Why not?
Because people on the street, strangers, are not as dangerous to you as the people that live with you. They don't invoke naturally that very primitive, deeply felt sense of injury.
Yeah. What about a colleague you work with every day? Do they?
Even there, I think generally they don't have the power unless you're attracted to them, or unless you're having some very emotional ties to them. If you felt like they're like a brother to you, and all of a sudden now they're insulting you or something like that, you might have that very primitive response as well.
So here's my wife, your wife, who is maybe your closest, dearest person, and you're saying that person is the most likely person to trigger this fight or flight response to make you furious.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is very exciting. It may sound bad, but in some ways it's exciting because I see couples coming in saying, oh, we're ignoring each other, we're disconnected, we're not interested in each other. And my sense is the opposite is true, that because of this state of arousal, they've become hyper-aware of each other, so that every movement, every tone of voice, a raised eyebrow means something. And they can literally, I've talked about a concept of marital paranoia, where they're so aroused and so watchful of each other that they actually are pulling further and further away from each other.
Is that for safety, like if they close down or something?
Right. I think it is for safety, and at the same time it's so self-destructive because the very person that could help them feel relief is standing right in front of them.
I remember a marriage counselor saying, well, this is the big stakes marriage. This is the big game. And I'm hearing you say that. Do you think most people know that?
No, I think they actually, because of this sense of pulling away from each other, I think they can, in a sense, train each other to feel unloved, uncared for, unimportant, even while they're being very watchful of each other. My sense is they then give each other tremendous power to do harm, undue power. So they're so busy trying to take care of each other that they're losing touch.
You know, I've heard that relationships, and I believe this, go through 3 stages. The first stage is the psychotic romantic phase, where you can do no wrong, you're madly in love.
Right.
Second phase, whatever you want to call it, it's adjustment to reality. And the third phase, you get past the second stage into companionate love and have a healthy, good, realistic relationship.
Right.
Can this reptilian brain trick in the first stage of that romantic, wonderful thing, or does it usually take a little touch with reality before you start getting really...
I think it takes a little touch with reality. It needs to get out past that, say, 18-month to 2-year dopamine-induced high that you get when you're first newly in love.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, if your partner does something just horribly atrocious during that time, then the brakes may get hit pretty hard. But one of the things that blast of dopamine, that kind of excitement neurotransmitter evokes in people is a closing down of objectivity.
Uh-huh.
So the very things that might 2 years from now annoy the heck out of you, at this time seem cute, or you just ignore them. So so 2 years into a relationship, you might hear a partner saying, "My gosh, I didn't realize he was never going to pick his clothes up off the floor," or "Wow, her laugh is really kind of annoying, and it used to be cute. What happened there?"
Yeah, and so you buy into what I said in the open, that conflict is inevitable.
Yes. Yeah.
Are big issues inevitable?
I really believe so. I think most couples can name off. A friend of mine, Brett Atkinson, talks about this sense of core differences where people may love each other, they're kind to each other, etc. But from family background, from really early learning, they have differences that are... They're probably never going to change those. I talk about the countertop argument. One partner thinks a countertop should be clean enough that if you had to, you could do surgery on it. And another partner says, no, countertops are great places to put things because then you know where they are. So the newspapers, keys, expired pets, anything can go on that countertop.
Expired pets.
And
I don't think so. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And these two people will probably never emotionally agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
If they do well and treat each other with respect, they can find a way to manage it differently. And they may find it humorous that the two see it that way. If they do it poorly, it'll become a sign of mental illness. If you want such a clean countertop, you must have been raised by obsessive-compulsive people. Or if you want a dirty countertop, you must have been raised in a barn, and it'll become much more personally attacking.
What percentage of couples go through a marriage without ever clicking into their reptilian brain, without ever having this fight-or-flight response?
I don't think that's possible, frankly. And what I think there is that some that would say we've never argued do something perhaps even more dangerous, which is they shut down and just avoid.
So when you hear a couple saying, we never fight,
what
do you think?
Most couples will say we never fight. Well, we've had these little things, but we manage them differently. And some couples are really skilled, and they literally never fight dirty. So they may argue, they may raise voices, but they don't resolve back into the very physical kind of aroused self-protection and name-calling, or like I call dirty fighting.
So the reptilian brain promotes dirty fighting when you
Yes.
get there?
Yeah, because in that state, once you're in the reptilian brain state, I always tell people the best measure for this, the physical measure is heart rate. If your heart rate's over 100 beats per minute, you're not talking to each other. That's shown up in the research. An emotional measure is if you feel like you have to defend yourself as a human being, the discussion's over. By my definition, you have moved into the primitive state then. And so if you need to remind your partner that you're a decent human being,
Defending
the discussion's
yourself.
probably over.
Yeah.
You can keep talking for 4 or 5 more hours, but the discussion is over because parts of your brain that have to do with new learning and self-observation have all shut down at that point.
Is this also a danger for abuse at this point?
Yes. Yes. It doesn't necessarily lead to that, although it may in many couples it necessitates abusive language or behavior, either storming out of the house or name-calling or insulting each other's parents, or a variety of what again, dirty fighting. But also in that state of arousal and helplessness, there's a heightened chance then that a partner might push, slap, grab. And I've seen some people ending up on the police blotters who were not, in my view, violent people. They were probably never going to do it again, but in the wrong moment had grabbed an arm or something, and they knew as soon as they did it that they were wrong.
Why, or is this a generally accepted way of looking at couples, counseling couples? I mean, you wrote this book that says this, but before I saw the title of your book, I don't in my experience, hear it talked about much about this reptilian brain in couples.
It's becoming more accepted as the neurology of it is understood better and better. So you have several different theorists, Susan Johnson, John Gottman, Atkinson, a number of these people that are looking at this now and really looking at the biology of fighting. And I think it's a very hopeful approach. All of these theorists focus in on, first, how do you lower the heart rate and re-engage with each other? Couples, when you're all fired up like this, your body will be sending off signals that you need to finish something, you need to fix something. We're not going to go to bed tonight until we fix all of our finances. Well, good luck with that. It's not going to happen.
In that state.
Right. However, if that couple were to say, before we go to bed tonight, we need to feel like we've treated each other with some degree of respect, and I don't think you think I'm crazy or stupid for wanting to talk about money, and you don't think I'm incompetent, I can probably go to sleep on that. Then we have a contract.
How important is successful skills at conflict resolution to the success of a marriage?
Surprisingly enough, not very.
Really?
In my view,
I'm surprised.
In my view, it's not the conflict resolution that gets it. That's great, but But to me, I'm looking for something much more primary, which is that they actually feel like they've engaged. Now, this may be splitting hairs a bit because obviously that leads to conflict resolution then. But the first step, more than negotiating a good outcome, and for many couples in this state, they feel like negotiation means losing something. We see this politically right now, obviously. Sure. And so negotiations means losing. My sense is the more powerful issue is that they actually feel like they are respected and cared for and that they are important to the other person. The rest of it's just mechanics.
But if you're fighting like this, how can you feel that?
Exactly. So you have to stop that.
Okay.
When I work with couples, often I will ask them early on and repeatedly, what would you need right now to have some minimal kind of relief? And often they can name it. They'll say, well, I don't need to fix everything, but I need him to quit smirking at me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Can you stop smirking? Yes, I can do that. I wasn't aware of it, and whatever. And you can get these minimal kinds of agreements that say, we're going to treat each other better this way.
Okay, Dr.
In this specific
Ferguson.
way.
Let's get to work. So you have this natural, unfortunately, easy to fall into pattern of getting really angry.
Yes.
And getting into this aroused state where you're hurting each other. How do you stop that?
You stop it, first of all, by being aware of it. So a lot of what I do initially is teaching about what this is like, and then getting a greater awareness early on of what it's like, and trying to catch themselves earlier and earlier in the process. I also encourage couples to create structure around their most difficult subjects. I literally have couples doing business meetings, or some hate that term, so we call it partnership meetings or whatever, but having very focused 30-minute meetings. By the way, most of the people I work with are skilled at this and know how to do it at work. They just don't do it at home. I put time limits on it because most couples don't trust each other. When one partner says, I need 5 minutes, the other partner goes, oh my God, it's never been 5 minutes. It's always 4 hours, and then you don't speak to me for 2 weeks after that. So why would I sign on for that? So you get this kind of immediate resistance. I also have meetings because couples typically startle each other. So you might go home tonight and say to yourself, I just can't wait to get home and maybe sit and watch TV for a few minutes and just put my feet up. And your wife comes around the corner and says, I have this bill that we need to talk about, and your evening has been screwed up. And so you make
because you know there's
face.
trouble in that discussion coming.
Or even that you didn't want to do that in the first place. You really didn't want to talk about money for a change. And you expect it maybe to go wrong or whatever. And your face conveys that you are not overly thrilled with this discussion. It takes about 30 to 40 milliseconds to read a face, so 30 to 40 thousandths of a second to read a face. If she's in a really good mood and she's had a great day and she's in her higher brain and she's in the front of her brain and it's just doing peachy and you guys have been getting along great, she may look at the face and go, oh, you're not too thrilled about this discussion. You want to talk about this later. If she's felt beat up at work, if she's just come out of surgery, if she hasn't been sleeping lately, in other words, if her body is stressed in any way, it may drive in through a different pathway into that primitive brain and feel personally assaultive, and she then might say, you never want to talk to me. Now that you've been accused of being a bad husband, you might say, why are you always coming at me with money? Which may be totally unfair, and yes, you're off and running. You're
off and running. Okay, let's say you are off and running. You've been to one session with you as a couple. What do you tell them to do when they feel themselves off and running?
To pause. And you do it in a lot of different ways. You have to be a little experimental because couples are different. Some people are very visual, for example, so I'll actually have them image a big pause button in front of them and press it. There may be people that just say, we like to joke, so we have a private joke. I had one couple that would say mushmelon when they thought they were getting off track. I thought that was strange to me, but it worked for them. They both thought it was kind of funny to say mushmelon.
And that would calm their beast?
They would basically, that was their private joke, their private signal, that the discussion isn't going to go anywhere. And sometimes we build in language to this to say that when you say mushmelon, the language behind that is, I love you to bits, I don't want to hurt your feelings, I don't want you to hurt my feelings, and let's take a break here.
Is it usually one person is in the reptilian state and the other isn't, or they usually both get there right at the same time?
Maybe not right at the same time, but it usually doesn't matter, because once they've developed a rhythm, and this is quite musical, there's a rhythm to fighting. Once one goes there, the other one gets pulled in due to a thing we talk about as mirror neurons and all that sort of thing with the brain, but in a lot of different ways. Once a partner looks across the room and gets the look, and then they respond to that look. The couple may not have said a word, and they're already going into combat mode.
Okay, so if you're trying to keep the lid on, but you're getting madder at your wife, and finally say, that gets me mad, you're doing that will trigger her to be in her reptilian brain?
Right, conceivably.
Bingo.
And there you go.
Okay, but what do you do if you really think you're right, and if you just listen for a minute more, you could make your point, but you're both mad, and you just want to finish your point?
First of all, what I work with people on is usually by the time you're getting to that point where it's so urgent for you to make your point probably isn't all that important. And in fact, because our rote verbal memory centers are still intact when the reptilian brain is in action, we often will tend to repeat ourselves. We may sound like we're being creative and artful, but we're really not. We're just saying the same thing. Maybe we're adding nasty language onto it. Maybe we're inflecting it to make the person sound stupid. But in some ways, we're probably not saying anything all that new.
Okay, so we throw out the word marshmallow, whatever. Then what happens next?
Then hopefully they agree on what the next step is. How are we going to hear each other? Do we need a meeting on this?
Well, don't you need time to calm down?
Exactly. And that's part of the issue, is they may need to decide to take that they don't want to talk about it for another day or 2 days. A minimum should probably be a half hour. One of the dangers of this is people will say, okay, pause, take a deep breath, drink a glass of water, I'll be okay. It takes about 30 minutes to lower your heart rate, really.
Should you walk away from each other and not be in the same room?
Probably. Now, again, this is somewhat experimental because partners may find that it's comforting to be close to each other, but just not talking. If they do walk away from each other, they need to know that they're doing it as part of the agreement as opposed to as a punishment.
Yes.
Many of us experience being walked away from as a punishment. So you walk away from me, you come back in a half hour, now I'm pissed because I'm angry because you walked away from me.
Right.
And so we have another layer of fighting.
Is this the result of people having poor communication skills? Like you mentioned, somebody can do it very well at work with a colleague but doesn't do it well with their partner.
Right.
Are these unskilled people, or is it just natural to couples this is going to happen?
I think it's natural to couples. The people I work with, many of them are skilled communicators. They're in the public eye. They are managers and executives. They are people that are highly, highly, highly skilled. And in fact, that's part of the problem, is that when they look at themselves, they are almost ashamed that they can tell themselves, I do this well. I work with therapists.
Sure.
And they'll say, I know how to do this. I know how to teach this stuff. I know how to do it with every other person on the planet except the person that matters most.
Maybe I shouldn't ask this question, but it might make listeners feel better. Have you ever found yourself in that position?
Oh, all the time.
Really?
Yeah. And I think my wife and I have been together for over 35 years, so we've kind of walked through what's important to fight about or what not to fight about. My son can take me into that state more rapidly.
Wow.
But when I say all the time, I'm exaggerating, but certainly every one of us, due to a variety of cues, it might be for one person, it may be traffic. For another person, it may be dust at home or a sense of disorder. We can go into it very quickly. It's how you manage it. And one of the things I talk about with couples is that the goal here is not perfection. The goal is how do you screw up gracefully, and your partner gives you some room to screw up without it having to be a terrible crime.
I would imagine that's very healing for some people to hear that, because there's probably shame that can be eradicated with that information.
Right.
Yeah, that's very good. So, okay, let's say you figured out the marshmallow thing, and you calm down and you get together a half hour later, and your physiology is better. It's back to normal. How do you avoid not getting there again?
In my view, this is a mindfulness kind of approach. So I talk a lot about mindfulness in that you're not necessarily that you have to go into meditation, but that you're paying attention to your own body even more than to what your partner is doing. In these meetings, it's not necessarily about resolving everything. It may be just about paying attention, so that and doing that in a non-judgmental way.
To yourself.
Exactly. So, for example, we're having a nice little discussion about where to go on vacation, and we're talking about all these fun spaces, and my wife says, well, I'd really like to spend a lot of time on the beach. And I'm making this up as I go because she's not a beach person and I'm not this way either. But and all of a sudden my heart rate speeds up and I feel a little tense and like I'm tightening up. And I could say, well, boy, I must be nuts. There must be something wrong with me if I'm getting all worked up over just vacation plans.
Sure.
Or I could just pay attention. And if I pay attention, I might say, I'm not a very good swimmer. When people want to go to the beach, then they want to go in the darn water, and I've never been fond of that, and I don't like really laying around on the beach anyway. And so it's not that I don't want to be with her, but if she left unexplored, she might look across the table and say, you don't even want to go with me on vacation.
So
Look
this
at you.
is self-knowledge. You've got to really know what makes you tick and how you're reacting and share that.
Right.
So that you're not making her bad or wrong.
Right. But to do that, you have to do it in parallel. Because for that kind of self-awareness, for that kind of, in a sense, letting your brain out to play a little bit and to be easy with yourself, you can't be in enemy territory. So you have to know that your partner is going to be working on this same process with you.
What about men versus women? I mean, talking about heterosexual couples here, different issue, gay couples, but, or I don't know. But men are different than women.
Right.
How do you bring that into working out conflict?
You know, I don't pay a lot of attention to that in the sense that people are different. I talk about the sense that they both come from different cultures. Even if they grew up next door to each other, they come from different cultures. They have different trainings based on race, gender, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to come with different traditions and rituals to this marriage. Carl Whitaker had this very funny quote when he referred to marriage is two tribes exchanging hostages. And right. I was never quite clear on what he meant by that, but I like the vivid imagery of it in the sense that, you know, these people are coming with their own rituals, and certainly males will tend to move towards problem solving quicker, and women will tend to move towards processing faster. But, you know, there's a lot of women in management, a lot of women that are involved in scientific endeavors, et cetera, and I'm seeing more and more women who move quickly into problem solving. There's many women that are really exceptional big sisters, and so they're really good at problem solving.
But what about things like control and isolation of the other person and possessiveness?
I believe that becomes more of a male issue. I see it more often with males. In fact, I'm getting ready to offer a men's group right now for men that are highly anxious and controlling and tend to deal with jealousy or feeling uncomfortable in social situations, because that tends to be a marriage killer. I'll stay on that for just a moment, because it's so dangerous, because what I hear from women quite often in those marriages is not that they're angry. It's that they went right past that to numbing, where they don't have any feelings. And they will say, I just feel like the marriage is over. I don't care if he gets better or not. He keeps promising he's going to get better, and I no longer care if he's going to get better or not.
Why do they move to numbness?
I think that it's so much work to try to manage another person's emotions, to reassure them constantly, to have to watch your P's and Q's when you go out socially, because he's going to get jealous if you talk to a male too long.
So basically he's very
insecure.
insecure.
Right.
Yeah.
And I treat that not as him being a jerk, although some of the guys that by the time they come in are being told that they act like jerks. I treat it as an anxiety condition.
Oh.
And anxiety is treatable.
Takes the inflammatory nature off
Yes.
the table. Besides backing away when you have this reptilian feeling, what are some of the other 2 or 3 basic ideas in resolving that conflict that are most important to walk away with?
The most important is that they keep an eye on how are they treating each other. And in a sense, how are they treating themselves? So they're keeping an eye on that mindful state of watching, am I feeling guilty?
Right.
Am I feeling
And
like I need
expressing
to defend myself, etc.? Yes.
In a non-attacking way.
In a non-attacking way. And this comes together with some I language and that sort of thing, where you focus on how you're feeling as opposed to interpreting your partner's feelings.
Okay.
I encourage partners that on certain subjects, they almost need to ask each other for permission to talk about subjects. So, for example, diagnosis. I can hear you tell me that you think I'm depressed or that I drink too much or whatever, if I feel like we're shoulder to shoulder looking at a problem. But if I feel like I'm being accused or told that this is why I'm a schmuck, then I can't hear you any longer.
Yeah. So how would you phrase that if you were trying to tell the person, I'm concerned about your drinking?
I would ask a person to be very behavioral in that and say, how does the drinking affect you? When you come home, you are not available for me to talk to. You start arguments a lot. You're often unpredictable. This is how it affects me, as opposed to you're a drunk, or there's something wrong with you, or
So you
you're
talk about
drinking
yourself.
like your father did, or
I
whatever.
experience this
Yes.
rather than you are.
Yeah.
So avoid the you are. Any other things we're have to
The other things that you ask permission for are to talk about each other's families,
Oh, no
because that's
kidding.
so primal.
Really?
That again, if you and I agree that my sister is a difficult person to deal with, and here's how we're going to do that when we visit with the sister, fine. If we triangulate my sister as the reason that I'm not supportive or helpful or whatever, and now we're fighting about whether the sister's a bad person or not, and why don't you support me, and why are you always against me, et cetera, then we're not really having a discussion.
What do you think of that old technique of you say something, if I'm your partner, I repeat it and make sure you understand it, or I'm understanding it right, and then you do that every time you talk?
I don't care for it. It doesn't work. By and large, the research doesn't support that it works as the treatment modality. However, I'd use it. It's called active listening, and when on certain subjects, on certain areas of the business meetings, or of trying to define what the problem is, I will use that as one tactic. The reason I say it doesn't work I've seen therapists who almost totally rely on that tactic, and what the research suggests is that it works as long as people are in therapy, because nobody talks like that.
Right.
When I was in my master's degree, that was
I
all
could
the
interrupt you to
rage.
say, I heard you say just now, no one talks like that.
Exactly.
That's how the couples respect.
Yeah, exactly. When I was in my master's program, that was all the rage, and everybody
Right.
was supposed to be doing active listening, and I found it so annoying. I literally couldn't tolerate it. I would feel like I was on a game show. And so I don't think people talk like that over the long haul.
Well, I'd like to thank you for being with us and approaching this very important subject. I'm sure we haven't talked about everything you have to say about how to enhance your marriage and communication, but this is pretty important stuff.
It
to
is.
stop this damage before it gets out of control. And if people want to buy your book, they can go to Amazon.com and
Exactly.
get it, or anywhere else.
I think it's also on the Barnes & Noble's website as well. Or
Okay.
on
And it's
.com.
available electronically. That's Don Ferguson. And Don, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thanks so much for having me on your show.
And I hope you'll join us on the next edition of Insights.